There we go. All right, so we can go ahead and get started. So we did some intros. First, I want to talk briefly about some of the different types of conversations that we have with voters. This will, have directly relate to folks' neighborhood council races, but you'll also recognize a lot of these strategies from presidential campaigns, from city council campaigns, from ballot measure campaigns that I have worked with some folks on this call on, and I know others of you have probably worked on as well. I had to include the AOC tweet about her canvassing shoes because it's so inspirational. I also included my email here, and I can share slides after. So if you have questions that come up, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to connect you with answers, I should say. Let's see, just letting David in. Hi, David, welcome. We're just getting started. All right. So I briefly just want to talk about what the concept of a voter universe is. Has anybody heard this term before? Voter universe or universe? So it sounds kind of familiar to some folks, unfamiliar to others. That's totally fine. This is kind of a wonky campaign term. Essentially what it means is if you're running for neighborhood council or you're running for city council or you're trying to pass a proposition or a ballot measure or elect a president, you probably can't feasibly contact every voter, right? So you have to make some decisions about who you're going to reach out to. You have to make decisions about what cross-section of your target district you're going to engage with in all these different ways, whether that's texting, phone banking, canvassing, literature drop, relational organizing, virtual house parties, whatever different tactics you use. So universe basically refers to your list, right? So to give an example, does anybody happen to know kind of what your win number in your neighborhood council district is? Like, the number of votes that you think you need to win, or just an estimate? Do you know, Nadia?
I'm running unopposed, but I saw that the win number for the person who won by the highest number of votes last time was only 17. So I feel like my neighborhood is really disengaged. I mean, I would say no one got more than 30 votes across the board.
Okay, interesting.
For VNC, I've been told that it takes about 60 to 70 votes to secure a position. I know people are banking more of like myself and a couple other people who we have relationships with, maybe getting 100 votes, but also that engagement is really something to learn about, definitely.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, so good examples. I mean, I think as folks are probably familiar with, it varies based on your neighborhood council. In the same way it varies, if you're in New York, it takes a certain, thousands of votes to get a city council seat. In LA, it is a bit different, right? We know there's different, districting and gerrymandering and such. But I bring this term to your attention because we don't have to talk to everyone. It's a worthy goal to knock on every single door in your district. If you're running for neighborhood council or president, or again, passing a ballot measure, what have you. But we actually don't have to do that in order to win. And we want to think carefully about who we are engaging with and who we're having those critical, meaningful conversations with in order to use our resources strategically. And I think that particularly applies here for neighborhood council races because, I'm guessing we're not dealing with huge budgets, which is totally fine. You do not need a huge budget in order to successfully get a seat on a neighborhood council race, but you still want to use your time and your energy and your kind of like human resources. It's not the term I wanted, your people resources effectively. Hi, Cindy, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. We're just getting started. And yeah, great to have you. Feel free to jump in the chat or unmute yourself if you have any questions at any time. Any questions about this term, voter universe? Does this make sense, or do we feel like we want more examples? Oh, wow, Jiyoung, 750? Dang, that's a lot. Do you want to say a little bit more about that race? You're on a slate, is that right? Or you're assembling a slate?
Yeah, we just finalized the slate like yesterday. We had a previous one that was larger, and then we disbanded it and have formed a new one. And yeah, so this, I'm just talking about at large. Last election in 2019, the highest vote getter for at large was 748. I actually myself had not seen these numbers, but when you get down to the regions, it's mostly double digit. So
interesting.
Yeah, there's 3 digit. Yeah, there are some in the hundreds, but much lower, like 200, 100, and so yeah, I'm surprised by the number for at large.
Yeah, wow. So I guess and you're running for an at-large seat, I would imagine.
Yeah, and just for like, just for comparison, in the ADEM election, which, I actually ran in and won just recently, I won with 938 votes. So it's pretty wild that the Silver Lake neighborhood council election has pretty similar engagement.
Wow, that's fascinating. Interesting. So is your slate that you've assembled, the new slate, are you talking about tactics yet, or are you still we're still formalizing the lineup?
I mean, we had already been talking about tactics. So yeah, we're getting like materials together, but we don't have tactics finalized or anything. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that number. There's a huge range in terms of what people need. And, I guess the amount of engagement would be the word, or the amount of knowledge that people in different NC districts have. So yeah, I really didn't know that it went up that high. That's interesting. I'm in Echo Park, so I wonder if it's similar. Other questions or comments about this concept of a voter universe? By the way, Cindy, are you running for neighborhood council, or are you just dropping in to learn?
I actually also just was recently elected to be a delegate, and I am now currently running to be a regional director for my region. So yeah, I'm just came here to learn.
That's awesome. Well, welcome. It's great to have you. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the types of conversations we have with voters. And I'm guessing that these terms are going to sound familiar to a bunch of you. And let me know if you've had some of these kinds of conversations. So the first type of conversation that we have is basically voter ID. And that is sort of to identify who is already a supporter, who's already planning on voting for us, voting for our slate, voting for our, ballot measure, whatever it might be, our presidential candidate. We call it voter ID for short, or supporter ID, supporter identification. And, what people like about this type of conversation is that there's no persuasion involved. So if someone's undecided, or if they're, leaning towards opposing someone else, okay, thanks, have a nice day. Thanks so much for this conversation. It was great to get to know you, right? We don't have to try and move them in that conversation. And in campaign lingo, the data that we get out of these voter ID conversations, we call it 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s. Does anyone know what that means? Any guesses?
Maybe like how strong with us they are. Like if they're 1, maybe they're not too certain who they're going to vote for if they're a supporter of us. 5, they're definitely with us and supporting us.
Yeah, exactly, Alex. So 5 strong support, 4 lean support, 3 undecided, 2 lean oppose, and 1 strong oppose. So this is like the standard, you know, way of tracking voter data and voter support for your candidate or your ballot measure. And if you work on a campaign or volunteer on a campaign, you might hear the language that's like, you know, how many ones have we identified in this particular district, or how many 1s and 2s have you identified? So I really like it. It's almost like sports language in a way. It's just like, okay, Nadia, how many 1s and 2s have you identified in Valley Glen? Is it Valley Glen or greater? Is it Greater Valley Glen? Valley Glen?
Greater Valley Glen.
Greater Valley Glen. Okay. I always get confused on which ones have greater in the front. So, you know, and then Nadia's like, okay, we've identified 30 1s and 2s, right? And then the goal would be to turn out all 30 1s and 2s to vote, right? The next type of conversation we can have is moving people who are on the fence, and we call that persuasion. This is a bit higher skill. People need to know what effectively moves people. They need to know to listen more than they talk. They need to know to avoid debate and avoid argument, and to agree as much as possible with the voter they're talking on the phone with, or the voter whose door they're at. So that requires a bit more training, but is incredibly important, right? So that's where you might recontact people who are 3s and 4s, or just 3s, right? Depending on how much capacity you have in your field operation. And then the last type of voter conversation we have is reminding our supporters to vote. So this would be where we contact our 1s and 2s, and we remind them, hey, you know, you requested your ballot. I know you're supporting the Silver Lake Progressive slate, or whatever your slate name is. You're supporting the Greater Valley Glen for Progress slate, just making these names up. And we call that get out the vote, right? Has anybody raised your hand, or, you know, put an emoji react if you've had one of these types of conversations with a voter before? Does this sound familiar? Hi, Lauren, it's good to have you. Good to see you.
Hi, you.
Awesome.
That
So
was my,
lots of us.
that I put my hand up. That was my reaction, saying, yes, I've had these conversations.
Oh, I saw. I just wanted to say hi, let you know that I saw you too. Feel free to jump in if you have questions or anything. It's good to have
Thank
you.
you.
And then, you know, the last type, which kind of fits into get out the vote, I call it like educational. This is related to get out the vote, and this is canvassing where you're letting people know that, you know, hey, you need to re-register as a Democrat in order to vote for Nadia Thomas for president. Or, you know, hey, you need to request a ballot in order to vote in the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council election. You know, you need to request a ballot by May 5th or whatever it might be. Any questions about any of these types of conversations or situations where we use these?
I have a question. How do
Yeah,
you
go for it.
decide how do you decide when to transition from one type to the next type? Like, what would be a good timeline?
That's a really good question. So it depends on a couple things. The first thing I would say is that in campaigns, things often move very fast, and you know, you may get the okay from other staff or other volunteers to transition to the next phase very quickly, right? It might happen like, you know, okay, Friday 10 p.m. we have enough 1s and 2s ID'd, so now we're moving to get out the vote, or now we're moving to persuasion. I would say it depends on number one, how much time you have, right? So do you have a month? Do you have 3 months? Do you have 6 months? Because, you know, the longer you can spend figuring out how many 1s and 2s you already have with you, then you put those in your back pocket, and you say like, okay, we're going to continue to recontact and reach out to them, maybe try and get them to volunteer, you know, get them to post on social media, get them to donate, send them fundraising emails, et cetera, keep them engaged, but you're maybe not going to knock on their door until you need to get out the vote, the weekend before the election or the day of or whatever. So that's that would help you determine when you are making that transition. And then the next thing would also be money, right? So if you have, money and volunteer capacity as well. If you have unlimited funds or, lots of funds, I guess, unlimited would be the dream. And you can print a lot of literature. You could spend a lot of time trying to knock on a lot of doors. But if you have less, you might want to target your voter universe for door knocking to be more specific, right? Like maybe you can find out, okay, which voters have donated to progressive candidates in the last 3 years or 4 years or whatever. Maybe you can knock on their doors. Or which voters voted in the last city council race, something like that. Does that make sense? But I think, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, finish. Then then I got another question.
I was just gonna say, I think Nadia's question is a good one because it speaks to something that I think is sort of inherent to campaigns, which is that it's kind of like, is it John Lennon, the quote that's like, life is what happens when you're making other plans? Is that John Lennon or is that George Harrison? I think it's Lennon. I'm glad no one knows.
It's Lennon.
Feel free to correct me. It's Lennon. Thank you, Lauren.
It's from
like,
his last album, actually. Beautiful Boy is the song.
Okay. Good to know. I'll have to go back and listen to that one. My first instinct was right. I guess I like to think of it with campaigns as like campaigning is what happens when you're making other plans. Like you make your field plan and then everything's going to change, right? Like maybe there's rain and the day you thought you were going to have 40 volunteers, you only have 10. And so you need to start doing canvassing in the evenings, or maybe someone accidentally, drops all the lit. So you have to switch to phone banking or something like that. Just something to, it's a truism, I think, of the way campaigns work. Matthew, you had a question.
So just to clarify, in this voter ID process, the end result would be to get a list of voters, presumably organized by their name or something like that. And then on that list, is there a common way to characterize voters by the likelihood that they are to turn out?
Yes. Yeah. So the biggest predictor of who's going to turn out to vote is who has voted historically. So who has voted in last elections. So or in the last election or the last primary, for instance. That is traditionally the way that campaigns will try and guess someone's proclivity to vote in the future is whether they voted in the past.
So then,
is that what you mean?
Yeah, I guess so. In this initial voter ID call, you're generally trying to glean whether the voter is generally supportive of the candidate or not supportive. And I was wondering if it's also I don't know, considered a good strategy to try and also intuit how likely they are to vote in the upcoming election, or is past data, I don't know, more predictive of anything you can get from them on the phone?
Yeah, I would say past data is the best predictor, and past data is also the best predictor of how much someone is going to engage politically in general. So, for instance, for a campaign that I'm involved in right now, which is a campaign around the single-payer healthcare bill that was just introduced, like a week or two ago now in the state assembly. We are patching voters through to their assembly members using what's called the 2 primes method, which is basically voters who have, voters who have voted in the last 2 primaries. And we're using that as a proxy for who is going to be somewhat politically engaged, maybe know what Medicare for All is, maybe know what single payer is. With the idea being, we don't need to actually move public opinion to move the single payer bill. You know, people already support this. We need to move the specific legislators, right? If we're trying to move public opinion, we might not use that proxy for political engagement to decide who to call. We might actually call people who didn't vote in the last couple primaries. So yeah, that's a bit of a tangent, but that's just one example of the kind of proxy you can use to make those determinations. And you know, going back to the concept of a voter universe for a second, if you do purchase voter data for your neighborhood council race, or if you're working with a voter data system, you know, for a future election cycle, like city council or president or Congress or governor, whatever, you get to search by things like age. So it's not just party preference. You can also, you know, you could specifically call people who are under 30 or who are over 60 or who registered to vote in the last month, right? You can be really targeted. And it doesn't always behoove you to be that targeted, but you do have that power when you have access to a voter data management system.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Any other questions about these types of conversations before we move on and talk about the different ways we can have them?
You mentioned a voter management or a voter data management system. Like, where would you find those or access those?
Yeah, good question. So a couple different things. It's called a CRM. A CRM, I think it stands for customer something management. I should know what that stands for. Salesforce is a CRM. It's basically a way of storing data. And there are a couple different ones that campaigns use. There's one called VAN. There's one called Political Data Inc. or PDI. So basically, you know, if you're affiliated with an organization that has access to one of these already, you merely just need to purchase the voter data from the county or the state in order to put the data into the system. And then there are other cases where if you're trying to get data that rapidly updates. So for instance, if you're running a city council race and you want to know, okay, who in District 10 has returned their ballot, right? You might need more like real time, or excuse me, live updating data. Then you would get something like PDI, which costs a bit more. Are you thinking about it for your specific race or just for the future?
You mentioned it. I was just wondering what it was and maybe how you could find it or where you would find it. And so this would obviously be something that maybe like if you're a funded, this could be an instrument or tool that you could use.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing I should mention is, you know, you don't need, yeah, I know, Jiyoung, I think we met only briefly, right? Like maybe I'm trying to put it together. We'll have to return to that. But yeah, Alex, the other thing I should mention is if you get voter data, you know, you can manipulate it and take a look at it in a Google sheet or an Excel sheet. You don't need one of these fancy systems. They're great to have, but I also know people who have run small campaigns just using a spreadsheet. So, you know, there's lots you can do that way too. Okay, moving right along. So these are the, you know, different techniques we're going to talk about today. I also do want to mention for folks who missed the training last week on how to run a phone bank, we did record that and we put it up on the LA Forward website. So I'm happy to share that link. It's a YouTube link. Happy to share it with anyone who wants that. I also wanted to mention that because of kind of the topic change for tonight, Next week, we're going to focus on how to have an effective conversation. This is one of my favorite topics. We're going to talk about, how do you persuade someone on the phone? How do you persuade someone at the door? How do you avoid debating and arguing so that you're focused more on listening rather than on lecturing? This is a topic I'm super into, and I think there's a lot. Yeah, Alex, you were saying you wanted the link or that you wanted to come next week?
Yeah, both. I think I missed last week's training, so the link would help. And I think I already
Awesome.
registered for next week's training.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm happy to share the recording with anyone who wants that. That was a fun one. And another topic I'm into, how to run a phone bank. So let's talk about some of these strategies. The first one is phone banking. When it comes to phone banking, we have a couple different options for how to do it. We can do manual calls. Perks of manual calls, they're free. People know how to do a manual call. They don't have to log into a fancy dialer, requires less training, tends to work better for, folks who are less familiar with technology, which is good because you want things to be accessible to your volunteers. You also have an option called a predictive dialer, which would be something like ThruTalk, or if you volunteered on the Bernie campaign, where I met Ji Young and where I was staff, or another presidential campaign, you may have used a predictive dialer that actually allows you to make calls to voters at a rate that's 10 times faster than manual dials. So you're going to have 10 times more conversations per hour than you would if you're making manual calls. But using a predictive dialer does cost money. This is another topic that I won't dwell on too much tonight, but I do want to just mention, if anyone wants more information or wants to be connected to any reps from dialer companies, or you want like an estimate, I have a lot of experience with that. And I excuse me. And I personally know a bunch of people who work for these companies. So if you're working on a campaign, you're like, we want to contact thousands of people or hundreds of people, let me know, I'll get you connected. The in-between option that's in between manual and predictive dialer is called a power dialer. That would be something like the Hub dialer or Call Hub or Call Evo. They all kind of have the same names. Call Fire is one that used to exist. A power dialer is basically allows you to auto dial landlines, because in California, it's illegal to automatically dial cell phone numbers. You have to have someone manually clicking behind the scenes to connect you. And so a power dialer is faster than manual, but not as fast or efficient as predictive, but it is a little cheaper. Any questions about that before we move on? Anyone thinking about doing phone banking for their neighborhood council races? Yeah, Ji Young.
Well, I just know that like certain orgs are going to do phone banking for their own membership. So I mean, if we can get access to lists, certain types of lists, I think we would like to do phone banking. But that was to answer your question. But my question is, have like certain types of ways to reach out to voters worked better than others, say during the pandemic?
That's a great question.
And then outside of the pandemic. I mean, when it's not pandemic times, in the before times.
Yeah. Oh, the before times. Sigh. Yeah, great question. So, yeah, first of all, in case folks don't know, we do have our first neighborhood council phone bank tomorrow. We'll be calling LA Forward members in regions 5 and 6 to turn them out to vote for progressives from all these different orgs. Yeah, so to Jiyoung's question, it really depends on the type of conversation you're looking to have. So if we think about our types of conversations, looks like we have someone new joining us. Welcome, Sylvester. Great to have you. Happy to get you caught up since we're recording this. You can watch from the beginning sometime, but it's great to have you. Thanks for joining. So it kind of depends on the conversation you're trying to have. So in my view, phone banking is the best way to get hundreds or thousands or more IDs. So like in the first phase of your campaign, when you're just trying to figure out how many people do you not need to persuade, right? And in the case of a neighborhood council race, you know, you might be able to do most of your conversations in this form of voter ID, you know, with limited persuasion, particularly if you're able to kind of pool your relational organizing resources. Like if everyone makes a list of everyone they know in Silver Lake, right? Or, you know, and if everyone knows 50 people and you're reaching out to those people and that kind of thing, that can be a really powerful way to you know, avoid having to have those persuasion conversations because, you know, that takes time, it takes energy, it takes training. So I would say phone banking is great for those voter ID conversations. But your question was really like, what was more effective, you know, if you're able, what's effective if you are able to canvass? I would say canvassing is the most effective way to have a persuasion conversation, one-on-one in person. But it's a lot less efficient than phone banking. So, you know, canvassing is effective, but your contact rate, as folks know, you know, who are on this call who've canvassed, you know, you may only talk to a couple people in an hour. You may only have one persuasion conversation in your whole canvassing shift. The other thing I'll say, and I kind of touched on this a second ago in regards to the relational organizing piece, is those are the people that we have the biggest likelihood of persuading. So, you know, like if we have friends or family in our NC district or whatever, city council district, whatever it might be, who we can persuade to vote in a neighborhood council election or city council election, they've never voted before. Those are the people we have the highest likelihood of persuading, even though it feels, in my view, I personally like, you know, struggle more with talking to family than talking to strangers about politics. That's my personal stance. I don't know if you feel the same way. Yeah, does that answer your question about those types of conversations?
Yes, yes. And and I totally relate to having it being easier to talk to strangers than to some relatives, because I have like Trumper relatives. But anyway, so yeah, okay. But I had also asked, like, do you have any experience about what has been most effective in during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I mean, it's difficult because I think, you know, there's obviously multiple factors. There's safety and then there's people's comfort level. So I think, you know, I haven't personally done any canvassing during the pandemic. I know people have done canvassing to great effect and done it as safely as possible. So, you know, is that possible? Yes. Yeah, I do think that in-person conversation is the best way to persuade, but I would definitely start with phone calls as the way to identify how many votes you already have in your pocket. So that would be the order of operations would be for me if I were running people you know and making a list of all of them that you can count on their vote. And then the second one would be the phone calls of, you know, just voters, strangers, whatever. And then third would be canvassing as a follow-up.
Thank you.
If need be. Yeah, for sure. Good question.
you mentioned something that like maybe somebody who hasn't voted before and who isn't likely to vote would be easier to persuade than somebody who has and who has experience voting.
I think maybe what I was trying to say is that someone in your family or in your like circle of friends or your community, your church or temple or whatever, in your community in some way, that if they're less likely to vote in general, you as someone who knows that person is going to be the best person to move them to vote. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
maybe I said it in a confusing way, but I think that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, like maybe somebody like is doesn't really actively participate in stuff like this. They could be an easier person to reach than for
Exactly.
you, somebody who is running and stuff like that.
Yeah. And so, like for someone like me who, I struggle with that, sounds like others do too. I try to remind myself that the energy I'm expending to have that conversation with my aunt, who might not vote in a primary normally or whatever, is more worth it overall. It's more efficient than talking to a stranger and trying to move that stranger. But the other thing is, it's sort of like when people say the best kind of exercise is the kind of exercise you like, or the kind of exercise you'll actually do. Like it doesn't matter if boxing is the best exercise if you're never going to take a boxing class. It doesn't matter. It's like if you're not going to do ballet, that's not the best exercise. I think some of this organizing work is analogous to that. It's like if people aren't going to do relational organizing, if they're not inclined, then that's okay. Then you go with the next best thing. But yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Okay. So like I said, I'm happy to follow up with anyone about specific like phone banking methods, specific dialers, how to target your list. Really happy to talk to people about that. The next tactic is text banking. And there's basically two ways of doing text banking. There's a mass text, which is where you're sending sort of like an auto text, having a computer do it. And then there's peer-to-peer, abbreviated as P2P, which is basically if, Alex and I were volunteers together and I assigned Alex like 300 or 400 texts to send on behalf of, Matthew's neighborhood council race. And then Alex and I would both sit there at our laptops and just go send, just over and over again, click, click, click. Has anyone done peer-to-peer texting before? Text banking? Yeah, it's fun. It's satisfying. And then, you get to do the responses as well. Sometimes people are mean, as they can be over all of these techniques. Text banking, not a good way to have a persuasion conversation. I think in my view, the best use of text banking is turnout for events. If you're not able to, turn out for your canvassing events, let's say, or phone banks. If you're not able to do phone calls to do turnout, peer-to-peer texting is a great alternative. And it can be fairly affordable. And another good use of it is to send a reminder text. So if you wanted to remind people in your network to vote for you, and you don't have access to a peer-to-peer texting platform, you can also just make a spreadsheet, right? And just go through and, you could use Google Voice, copy and paste the number into Google Voice, and just copy and paste the text and remind people that way. I think that's effective. I think maybe DSA was doing something like that relationally as those reminders. Any questions about text banking? It's pretty straightforward.
I think like Ji Young said, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, that I think it would just be obtaining the lists, and then being able to kind of like text banking. Like, would there be certain apps that you would use for text banking, or like, how would you like send out those mass texts?
Yeah, good question. So there are apps that you can use to do it. There's one called Spoke, There's one called Hustle. There's others. But without that, and if you're doing this on a smaller scale, your best bet is to just use Google Voice or just use your phone number and just copy and paste and do it from your computer. And of course, that would be your free option as well. But again, just to hammer that point in over and over, your best bet for people to contact right off the bat are people you already know, and then people that they know, and so on.
Google Voice does have a limit on the amount of text that you can send, like within a certain amount of time. Because I remember over the election, the 2020 election, I got blocked a couple times and had to like recreate a new account. And then they just like banned me for a while. I haven't checked back. So just so you know, I think it's like 150 within like an hour or something. Just to
That's
be
a good
aware.
point.
You might want to shrink
Yeah.
the voter universe for the texting.
Yeah, that's a very good call. Forgot about that. I remember when we were working together and you let me know about that. It's good to know. The next tactic, my dog is trying to get my attention. Come here, bud. He's confused about why I'm talking to a screen yet again. So the next tactic is canvassing, one of my personal faves, also known as knocking on doors. There are basically two types. The two types would be a lit drop, which is just where you're leaving a door hanger or a flyer on someone's doorstep, never in their mailbox because that's illegal, but a doorstep or on their doorknob. And the second type would be traditional, where you are knocking on their door, saying, hi, I'm a volunteer with LA Forward Action or DSA or whatever. Can I speak with Nadia? Is Nadia home? And then having that voter ID, persuasion, or get out the vote conversation with Nadia. Canvassing is awesome. Canvassing is expensive in a way because it requires more training to have that effective conversation. But, to Ji Young's question about what are the most effective ways of reaching people, pre and during the pandemic, canvassing is the most effective way to persuade people. In person, followed by phone banking. Those are those most effective ways. Oh, that's really cool, Cindy. You did some COVID safe canvassing. Do you want to talk about that at all? What it was like to persuade voters, have those conversations?
Yeah, sure. Well, it was actually really interesting. I didn't really expect there to be so many different orgs out there, like all canvassing, and then so many different excitement, that I think that the voters could feel that, even though I'm sure they were tired of just, being bombarded by phone calls and to have the runoffs there. But I think that they understood that their vote was important and they felt that attention, and then being able to have that conversation with them when they had questions, when they were on the fence, and then, kind of guiding them through, keeping in touch with people who seem like they were going to vote, making a plan with them, and then following up with them. That was really helpful because, life happens and you get busy. So being able to follow up really got them to take that final step to go vote.
Cindy, did you actually like knock on the doors and have people come to the door and have that face-to-face conversation, or what did the canvassing actually look like?
Yeah, we did. So we were sent out with a group, but you're all in different vehicles. And then you're given like your territory. And so you go on your own to each door, and then you're wearing a shield and a mask, which at first, most people open the door and they're like, whoa. But they understand, so you're trying to keep yourself safe and them too. And then, yeah, most people would, take the time, and I'd always mention that I came from Los Angeles, and that way they feel like, it's a little more meaningful to have come out there during the holidays, to take the time to talk to them and answer any question they had about the candidates, just making sure that they understood how important this was. So yeah, it was a really good experience, actually.
Thank you.
Okay. Mhm.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, Gian, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to shout out the slate that Cindy was on, Democrats for Justice in the ADEM election, because they had a really great campaign.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it was, I mean, I really kind of was only paying attention to the Southern California ones, but you know, all of us had to just kind of do you know, a pandemic campaign and shift gears, and so yeah, they had a great campaign, but which was actually really social media heavy, I would say. But yeah, we did a little bit of canvassing, and we didn't do that much, but what we did was kind of go to like parks, and so yeah, it wasn't like super like strategic or anything like that. It was just like where there are a lot of people, and so like 2 people went to Debs Park, and people responded really well to it. They really like seeing the candidates and seeing them make an effort. And so, yeah, I had conversations at the park, just kind of walking around. And like I said, people really appreciate that like in-person interaction.
That's a great idea. Yeah, I should specify, you know, I definitely didn't include every possible way of contacting voters. The ones that I focused on for, you know, for tonight were ways of contacting specific voters. But that being said, you know, like the park example or tabling outside a library or grocery store or whatever, you know, clipboarding, whatever you want to call it. There's lots of ways of contacting voters in general. And I think that point about people liking to meet the candidate and see that they're making that effort to engage with people is a good one for sure. The last method, which I've touched on a bunch thus far, is relational organizing. And relational organizing has been very, what's the word? Like very chic, very of the moment in the past couple of years, I would say. You know, on the Burning campaign, we used the Burn app. I'm sure some folks are familiar with that. The idea being, you know, you can talk to anyone at a park, at a grocery store, or someone you know, and then kind of put them into the app so that the campaign can follow up with them and remind them to vote. But in terms of neighborhood council races, I do really recommend doing some sort of relational organizing. You could have a virtual house party. You could, you know, call everyone in your phone who lives in your district. There are apps that allow you to send, there's apps called, there's one called Outreach Circle or Outvote, one called Reach, just like the dialers, they all have really similar names. But it allows you to basically import your contacts to the app and go text, 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 text over and over again. So that you're texting people you know, but you're doing it in a way that is similar to that peer-to-peer method. So again, that's something I'm happy to talk to people offline about for sure. Any questions about relational organizing, either why we do it or different methods? Jiyoung, were you raising your hand from before or again?
Oh, I didn't mean to have it up, but can I just add something?
Oh, it's all good. Yeah.
So like you know, even though I've lived in Silver Lake for a long time, I would say most of my friends don't live in Silver Lake, but I do have some, friends who live in Silver Lake. And so my plan is to talk to the people that I do know and ask them to reach out to their people. And so that was something that was very helpful in the ADEM elections, just getting the commitment from my people to reach out to their people.
Yeah, I think that's great. And you can kind of, I think it was DSA who was making sort of like an event of it. Having someone DJ and like play music on the Zoom or whatever, and then ask everyone to text 20 friends and get a commitment from them or whatever it may be. So I think that's a great idea. All right, moving right along. Actually, just bear with me for 1 minute. I'm gonna grab a treat for my dog because he's distracting me. Just give me 1 second. Dog mom life. 1 second. All right, I'm back. I got the bone with peanut butter in it. There you go, bud. Okay, thank you everyone for your patience. This is witching hour. There you go, bud. Ooh, okay. Okay, any questions about this before we move on? We've talked about a lot of different techniques.
I have a question about tabling. I saw, Jiyoung, you're gonna table. Did you contact the businesses you'll be tabling in front of? Or are you gonna table in public spaces like parks?
We're planning to table in public spaces.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you thinking of doing tabling as well in your area, Nadia, and you're trying to pick spots?
Well, yeah, because of COVID, that's why I was asking about Cindy's experience, because we felt the progressive slate that I'm running on, we felt that people wouldn't be maybe as receptive to knocking on doors, and being in a high Latino neighborhood, not everybody, I'm the only one who speaks Spanish that I know of on our slate, and my Spanish isn't 100%. So we thought it might be a little bit more beneficial if we table in the parks, especially since a lot of our slate like goals are to address our parks and pedestrian safety so that our neighbors can access our parks, and also our unhoused neighbors who often are living in the parks. So we were considering tabling there, and then also tabling in front of grocery stores, but we didn't know, the Girl Scouts, they're out there. I don't know how they get out there. So I don't know like what is legal that we could do as far as businesses go.
That's a good question. I've definitely done clipboarding for campaigns outside of stores, and I think what I've done, and it may just depend on the store and maybe different due to COVID, as I think you're speaking to, is just go in and ask if you can do it. And sometimes there's like a certain area that they don't want you to block because that's where people are coming out with their carts or whatever. Yeah, I think unfortunately it just depends store to store. So yeah, unfortunately don't have any specific advice on that. Yeah, Lauren.
Well, a lot of stores discourage it, and they'll make the private property excuse. Although I would say if they let the Girl Scouts there, then they have to let everybody there. But because of COVID, they're all waiting in lines to get in, and usually that's on public property. And so that's a way to get around any provisions. Like, for example, Whole Foods almost always has a horribly long line, Lassen's and Trader Joe's. And I think those are also areas where you are most likely to find people who are living in the neighborhood and able to vote. So I'd start there. Another one is they're not always going to be residents, but COVID testing. Lines are huge. So that's just a suggestion. And it's always usually on public property. So there'd be no legitimate reason to tell you no.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, great points. The other thing I would add about canvassing people in the line is there's this social pressure element. So if people see that those around them are engaging with the canvasser and saying yes to the conversation, they might feel a certain social pressure in a good way to also engage with you. Doesn't always work that way, but sometimes I've experienced. Yeah, Lauren.
Yeah, one other thing I want to mention, bookstores. It's just my feeling often, I mean, that's where I've had most of my political conversations at random, is with people waiting in line to go to bookstores or working in bookstores. And I think that, what neighborhood did you say you were in?
I'm Greater Valley Glen.
Okay, I don't know that area well, but I would look for some place where the groups that you were trying to target tend to show up. You know, is it a grocery store? Is it, I don't know, Home Depot? Is it the taco truck?
It's mostly taco trucks and street vendors that you see people out and congregating, and parks.
And so taco trucks, that's on public property and people are waiting for their orders. I think, I mean, the hours won't be great, but I think that's a really good place to get people, especially people who might respond to, I mean, one thing I've used with running recently, although not for neighborhood council, is COVID. You know, people are experiencing issues with COVID, whether it's rent, whether it's loss of job, whether it's being furloughed or working at home. Those are problems that you could sort of like use to get in on the conversation. But any place where the person is held hostage in a line on public property is always a good place.
Awesome, yeah.
Yeah, I love those ideas. Now I'm craving tacos. I blame you, Lauren. This is just a quick checklist. This is from labor notes. So these are this is around, you know, decision making around picking a tactic for labor organizing. But I think a lot of these questions, frankly, apply to any organizing. I just want to draw your attention to a couple of them. The first one is it visible, right? So some of these types of organizing give you visibility, like flyering or lit drops. Some give you no visibility, but you may have more effective persuasive conversations or voter ID conversations. And that would be things like phone banking, right? It's not really visible at all, although you are potentially reaching people other than the people you speak to, right? So for instance, if I call Nadia and her husband picks up, or if I call Nadia and after she gets off the phone with me, she's like, oh yeah, some person just called about neighborhood councils. And you know, she and her husband start talking about the slates or talk about the elections, right? You're reaching beyond the target. Yeah, that's a great point, Jiyoung, about non-traditional outreach, formerly incarcerated people or young people, absolutely. The other thing too is it fun, right? So something like canvassing or phone banking can be really challenging. Can you offer it, you know, can you give it a themed Zoom backgrounds, a fun training, a speaker, even if the speaker is someone from your slate, right? They don't need to be AOC for it to be fun. You don't need to have Nina Turner for it to be fun. Although that can help. And you know, I keep picking on Nadia, but Nadia is great at this. She did themed phone banks for Measure J and Prop 15 for LA Forward. You know, a date night phone bank with date night themed candlelit Zoom backgrounds and asking people to bring a +1, right? So, you know, there's lots of different questions to ask yourself. You know, will it could it possibly backfire, right? Is there a way that people could interpret this in a negative way? Questions like that. All right, moving right along. So, you know, this is basically the end of the slides. I wanted to keep it really simple. But what I wanted to ask is, do people have specific questions now that we've kind of gone over these tactics? Are you trying to work through, you know, what you and your slate or what you individually are going to do? And if so, do you want to kind of bring that up with the group, and we can maybe problem solve a bit? So I'll just open up the floor for that.
I did want to ask a question in regards to so in Venice there is a lot of, I guess, like unhoused population, and that is like a topic that does get discussed a lot. And now like the service provider that I work for, Safe Place for Youth, um our name is starting to come up a lot in like these neighborhood councils, or like we just got some property approved for some low income housing projects. So we have a couple housing projects in the works. But now, some people can be kind of critical of SPY and the work that we do, saying maybe we don't do enough. Now, with more service providers like entering the arena, or like, some coworkers have also filed for candidacy out of encouragement from me and some community organizers. We want to have more of like a service provider approach. And I know that a lot of times in the past, like the opposition and the people who have been attending these councils and who have been elected, kind of have like one mind frame of like, let's just move them out, let's just ship them away. But now, not really service provider friendly. As an old coworker of mine with lived experience was on the VNC, the neighborhood council, and every time something got approved, like every time, he wanted to make a vote, just the opposition wasn't that great. So now I thought about maybe not disclosing that I work for a service provider, but again, I mean, I'm sure at some point it'll come out, because like it'll need to when discussing certain issues. Not promoting my organization, of course, but just letting people know that my organization like does exist and stuff like that. But now, like with like how would somebody approach that? You know what I mean? Like service provider approach, and like opposition, and just like the unhoused population topic, and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'd love to hear others' thoughts on that. Are you asking in regards to like your messaging, like for instance, flyers or website, or are you asking in regards
No,
to
yeah, I think
what?
more along the lines of like like I definitely don't see a reason to disclose that when like giving fires or in discussion, or unless that I see that like they're open to like service providers, and like want that kind of support in their community. But other than that, like this is definitely something separate that I'm doing, because my organization is a nonprofit organization, so they can't officially endorse me, of course. But like there's no really like reason to bring this up while I'm running, unless like I see somebody supports the organization I work for. Because like my role running and then my organization are two separate things. But I also want to prevent like maybe a conflict of interest on like things that could come up. Like for example, if somebody's like, oh no, like like he works for like this service provider who does this, like he can't vote on this, or he can't have a say on this. Like that's also something I want to prevent. I think like how to prevent I think ridicule and like opposition and maybe flack um, regarding the help I'm trying to bring to the community, and not have it be seen as like like a negative thing within the community.
Yeah, really good questions. Lauren, did you want to weigh in on that?
I do actually. So Alex, are you on an NC right now?
So I'm running for at-large position.
Okay, so yes, Venice is a hotbed of in terms of tensions in the community. dealing with the unhoused. I personally think that there's going to be even more tension with people who may become unhoused, and that's a way in to be people more sympathetic. The basic, there but for the grace of God, go you. I think it's always a mistake to run away from things. I would suggest that rather than name the organization that you work for, you claim the space as someone with expertise in dealing with unhoused issues. And this is why you should be on the neighborhood council, because you understand some of how the system works. You can help your neighborhood council navigate these systems, and you can bring what you've learned to the discussion. And it may not be what everyone wants to hear, but you have important, practical experience in dealing with these impacted communities, particularly the impact on being unhoused on the young. You make that your calling card. Stay away from naming your institution, obviously, but you can speak to your skills, man. And you can, with authority, speak to hecklers. With all due respect, sir, I understand you're afraid of this, but your fears have no bearing in reality. I work in this field, and these are the facts. That is a position of strength, and you should just claim it, seize it. When it comes to conflict of interest, no need to worry about that in advance. If you are elected, you will get ethics training, and ethics training from the Department of Neighborhood Council will teach you how to avoid any areas where you may have to recuse yourself to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest. Your expertise is important. You would only be, well, I don't even want to get into that now, but you will be trained on how to avoid those conflicts. So you don't have to worry about that now.
Now, do you suggest that like something I put on like my statement, like, I filed for candidacy, right? And you can include a statement. Now what I put on my statement was like more of like the lived experience that I have in like the justice system, like the military, college, like foster care system, being unhoused, and I think like the work I want to do in the community. Now I didn't really name myself as a expert working in a service provider and having knowledge and critical knowledge on these issues, but I more so talk to like the lived experience that I have and how that could also be critical when discussing issues.
Both are good, because your personal story is always, especially when it's compelling, as you've described, always a fantastic place to start. There's no downside to that. You could, however, add a bit that you've taken that lived experience and it's now become your vocation. That's how I would tie it together and give no more explanation than that. I think you just lead with your compelling story, and then you, whenever you're in a public setting or when you're asked the questions, you claim that expertise. Who's going to be able to say to you, you're wrong? It was like, excuse me, I've lived it. What's your experience? That quiets a lot of people when you call them on their shit, pardon the profanity, but that sometimes happens. People are frustrated, but I think it's harder for somebody who's been in that situation and is now running to try and alleviate or improve it, to be shamed into backing down by someone who has no idea what they're talking about and is just going on their bigotry. It's very difficult to push back against somebody who has lived it and survived it.
It does get hard for people to kind of argue when you say like, I've lived this. So yeah, that is definitely a good point.
Yep. And just that's a good thing. I would just say, if you want to add, staying away from who hires you, but add, and it's through this that has made me the person that I am and has made this my vocation. I think that's a good way to go.
Yeah,
Thanks for
that's
that
great
feedback.
insight. Yeah, thanks for bringing that question up, Alex. Nadia, I saw you had your hand up as well.
Oh, I just wanted to say, Lauren covered everything because they're amazing. But I also had kind of a logistical question, because I know every neighborhood council runs a little bit different, but I'm running on a progressive slate. So some people are running in certain districts within our neighborhood council, and some people are running at large. And as I shared in the beginning, our community is not engaged, and I feel pretty confident that a lot of them aren't even aware of the neighborhood council. So when you're running on a slate with people who have different voting, are going to have a different voting experience, how do you think is the best way to effectively communicate that? Because in my instance, I'm running in District 6, so only people who are stakeholders or residents in District 6 can vote for me. So if someone is looking at our slate flyer and sees all these names, and then they're trying to find me, but they can't actually vote for me because they're maybe in District 3, how would you frame that or clarify that in a lit drop or in a flyer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Lauren's the expert here. Did you have a thought, Lauren?
Yeah, I do. So this is a really, I can't see who asked the question. Who am I speaking to, please?
It's Nadia.
Nadia.
Hey, Nadia.
Hey.
So this is a really important question, and it gets even more complicated because they have different ballots. So you have got to make sure you carve that out when you're speaking to people. And one thing you want to do is when you're talking to them, you have to counsel them to request a district ballot, which means you are going to have to spend a fair amount of time canvassing your district, right?
Right.
So you can't do the general all around and hit the popular places like somebody who's running at large. You have to canvass in your district, and I'm helping someone, because I'm not up for re-election, I'm helping someone canvass in my district by basically hitting all the apartment buildings, including mine. And then, and that way I can explain to them that they should vote for the candidate for District 6, and I could recommend them because blah, blah, blah. Or actually, I'm District 5. So that's two things you have to do. If your slate mates are covering the general areas, I strongly encourage you to do more door-to-door, especially if you guys have door knockers in your district, right?
So, Lauren, do you think that I should have a separate flyer that separates, because our current flyer just has us on together and doesn't delineate that we're two different kinds of candidates, because I didn't think about it until now. And so now I'm thinking, do I need to have a separate flyer that delineates the progressive candidates running in District 6, and then these are your at-large candidates, so that people—
I would.
Okay.
And what I would do if you're going to do your own, I'd put you at the top, you know, because you're canvassing in your district, and then all your at-large slate mates on the bottom, because they can't vote for anybody else running in a district they don't live in. And that's the pitch that I would use, right? So you're on a slate, you're not alone, but definitely vote for me and all these other people, because that's what gives the slate its power.
But all these other people who are at large, right?
At large, yeah.
The at large.
It gets too confusing, and what you don't want is somebody to spoil their ballot.
Right.
Right? Because I don't think this city clerk has thought of a way to cure ballots, or if people have clicked the wrong thing. And then on your end, you need to make sure, because you only get one ballot. And this is so backwards of them. Nobody's going to know that. When it was in person, they would just hand it to you, right? So the person should request a ballot for their district, right? So you need to tell them that, because it is not intuitive. And you want to make sure they're prepared for the question they will be asked. And also, just to be on the safe side, print out some ballot request forms in English and in Spanish or any other language.
Yeah, I have them in English, Spanish, and Korean.
Yeah, and help them fill it out.
Great.
Right, so make sure that, are you registered to vote? Right, so you're registered, you've been through the portal, but come with those paper things and help them fill it out. That is the best way to avoid a mistaken ballot being sent out.
I didn't realize that there were different ballots for each district.
I didn't either till I asked the question, and I had the city clerk responded.
Okay. Okay. I don't even know if I registered for the right ballot now, because I did request a ballot, but I don't know if I requested the right ballot.
Usually
now.
it'll say district, general, or something else. But yeah, if you know what, let me just put, while you guys keep on talking, I'm going to put the response that I got from the city clerk in the chat.
Yeah, because I created a website with hyperlinks so that people could go onto our Progressive website and then click the link that goes to request ballot, and then also has links to download the PDFs of the paper ballot in the 3 different languages. But now I'm wondering if I should have I need to put more instructions on that page so that they know to request for the right district that they're in, if they are even aware that, that there are districts.
Also, I want to encourage you, as questions come up, to reach out to the city clerk's office for the person who is the liaison to the neighborhood council that you're running for, and ask them these questions